The Ghost Herd of the Llano Estacado. My inheritance wasn't land or money. It was a trunk full of dust and ghosts. When my great-grandfather, Elias Vance, passed away at the age of 97, he left me, his only living descendant with the family name, the contents of a single, battered steamer trunk. Inside, beneath faded wool blankets and a tarnished silver belt buckle, was a small, leather-bound journal. The leather was cracked like dry riverbeds, and the pages were yellowed and brittle, smelling of old paper, cold air, and something else, something like old sorrow. I was a historian, or at least I had a degree that said so. My life was spent in climate-controlled university archives, deciphering faded ink on official documents. This journal was different. It was a raw, unfiltered piece of the past. The first few pages were mundane: observations of the trail, sketches of fellow cowboys, notes on the price of beef in Dodge City. But as I turned deeper, the entries, dated in the winter of 1886, changed. The handwriting grew frantic. The ink bled as if from a trembling hand. He wrote of a cattle drive across the Llano Estacado, the staked plains of Texas, a place he called the Ocean of Grass. He wrote of a trail boss named Silas King Kincaid, a man with a fearsome reputation and an unyielding will. And he wrote of the sky, how it turned a sickly, bruised yellow just before the world went white. The final entry was almost illegible, a desperate scrawl. "The White Death has taken us. Kincaid's greed, our tomb. The herd, God, the herd screams forever." That was it. The rest of the journal was empty. Local histories mentioned the Great Die-Up of 1886-87, a catastrophic winter that decimated cattle herds across the plains. But this felt more personal. What did he mean by Kincaid's greed? And why did the idea of a screaming herd send a shiver down my spine in my well-lit modern apartment? The historian in me saw a mystery. The descendant in me felt a duty. I booked a flight to Lubbock, Texas, with a rental car waiting. The journal was my only map. I was going to the Ocean of Grass to find the echo of a scream that had been trapped in the wind for over 100 years. I wanted to find the ghost of my great-grandfather and the ghost of his herd. The Llano Estacado was not a landscape. It was an absence of landscape. A flat, featureless world that stretched to every horizon, where the sky felt more real than the ground beneath my feet. Driving for hours, I saw nothing but scrub brush, distant pump jacks, and the shimmering heat haze. It was easy to see how a man could lose his way here, not just geographically, but mentally. It was a place that could swallow sounds, stories, and entire herds of cattle. I found a small, dusty town called Matador, which the journal mentioned as their last supply stop. It wasn't much more than a wide spot in the road, but it had a small historical society housed in a former courthouse. Inside, I met a woman named Isabella Reyes, the county archivist. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen generations of stories pass through her town. When I showed her the journal and mentioned the name Elias Vance, she nodded slowly. "I've heard the stories," she said, her voice soft. "Not about your great-grandfather specifically, but about the Kincaid Drive. It's a local ghost story, the ghost herd of the Llano.
They say on the coldest nights when the north wind blows, you can still hear them. Thousands of cattle bawling in the dark. She led me to a wall of faded photographs. "This is them," she said, tapping a brittle picture. There they were, a dozen cowboys squinting into the sun, their faces a mixture of youth and trail-worn exhaustion. And in the center, a man who stood taller, broader, with a dark beard and eyes that seemed to burn even in the faded sepia. Silas King Kincaid, Isabella confirmed. He was the only one who survived, walked out of the blizzard a week later, half dead but alive. Said the storm came out of nowhere. A tragedy. He sold the story to every newspaper that would listen, became a minor celebrity for a while. I scanned the faces, and my breath caught. On the far right was a young man, barely older than me, with a hopeful, almost gentle smile. My great-grandfather, Elias. Seeing him there, so full of life, made the journal's final, desperate words feel like a fresh wound. "Is there anything else?" I asked. "Anything unofficial?" Isabella's gaze flickered. "Some folks said Kincaid came out of that storm with heavier pockets than he went in with. But that's just talk. Old grudges die hard out here."
I spent the next 2 days immersed in the journal, cross-referencing Elias's entries with the sparse records at Isabella's archive. The two timelines began to weave together. From the Journal of Elias Vance, November 1886. The herd is magnificent. Nearly 3,000 head of prime longhorn, carrying Kincaid's King's Crown brand. They move like a river across this endless grass. Kincaid pushes us hard, from before sun-up to after sundown. He says there's a buyer in Colorado with a government contract and a bonus for early delivery. The men are tired, but the promise of a fat payday keeps our spirits high. The sky is clear, the air is crisp. There's a fortune on the hoof ahead of us, and the whole world feels full of promise. In the present, I found records of the King's Crown brand, registered to Silas Kincaid. But I also found something odd. A bill of sale from a rancher near Matator for a smaller herd, about 500 head, to a man named Josiah Bell, a cattle broker Kincaid was known to work with. The sale was dated just 2 days before the Kincaid drive was scheduled to leave. It seemed insignificant, a minor detail. I pushed it aside and continued to read, letting Elias's voice guide me back in time. From the Journal of Elias Vance, late November 1886. The weather is turning. A strange stillness has fallen over the plains. The cattle are restless, lowing nervously all night. The older hands, men who have seen a dozen winters on the trail, are watching the northern horizon. The sky has a strange, milky haze to it, even at midday. Kincaid dismisses their concerns. "Just a blue northern," he scoffed. "It'll blow over in a day. We push on." But this feels different. The wind has died completely. There is no sound but the shuffling of hooves and the creak of saddle leather. It is the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath before a scream.
A young cowboy named Charlie got spooked, said we should turn back to the shelter of the Palo Duro Canyon. Kincaid dressed him down in front of everyone, called him a coward. The matter was settled. We are riding north, straight into the quiet. I looked up from the journal, the air-conditioned silence of the archive feeling suddenly oppressive. Outside, the Texas sun beat down, but in my mind I could feel the cold gathering. I could feel the quiet. The story wasn't just in the words Elias wrote, but in the growing space between them, a space filling up with dread. Kincaid wasn't just determined, he was reckless. He was driving his men and his herd towards a cliff, and only he couldn't or wouldn't see it. The herd is magnificent, nearly 3,000 head, carrying Kincaid's King's Crown brand. They move like a river across this endless grass. Kincaid pushes us hard, from before sun-up to after sundown. He says there's a buyer in Colorado with a government contract and a bonus for early delivery. The men are tired, but the promise of a fat payday keeps our spirits high. The sky is clear, the air is crisp. There's a fortune on the hoof ahead of us, and the whole world feels full of promise. In the present, I found records of the King's Crown brand, registered to Silas Kincaid. But I also found something odd. A bill of sale from a rancher near Matator for a smaller herd, about 500 head, to a man named Josiah Bell, a cattle broker Kincaid was known to work with. The sale was dated just 2 days before the Kincaid drive was scheduled to leave. It seemed insignificant, a minor detail. I pushed it aside and continued to read, letting Elias's voice guide me back in time. From the Journal of Elias Vance, late November 1886. The weather is turning. A strange stillness has fallen over the plains. The cattle are restless, lowing nervously all night. The older hands, men who have seen a dozen winters on the trail, are watching the northern horizon. The sky has a strange, milky haze to it, even at midday. Kincaid dismisses their concerns. Just a blue northern, he scoffed. It'll blow over in a day. We push on. But this feels different. The wind has died completely. There is no sound but the shuffling of hooves and the creak of saddle leather. It is the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. A young cowboy named Charlie got spooked, said we should turn back to the shelter of the Palo Duro Canyon. Kincaid dressed him down in front of everyone, called him a coward. The matter was settled. We are riding north, straight into the quiet. I looked up from the journal, the air-conditioned silence of the archive feeling suddenly oppressive. Outside, the Texas sun beat down, but in my mind, I could feel the cold gathering. I could feel the quiet. The story wasn't just in the words Elias wrote, but in the growing space between them, a space filling up with dread. Kincaid wasn't just determined, he was reckless. He was driving his men and his herd towards a cliff, and only he couldn't or wouldn't see it.
Isabella found me poring over old maps, tracing the likely route of the Kincaid Drive. She placed a cup of coffee on the table. "You look like a man chasing a ghost," she said gently. I told her about Kincaid's recklessness, his dismissal of the warnings. "That's the heart of the legend," she replied, sitting across from me. "The story goes that the herd wasn't just lost, it was betrayed. They say the spirits of those cowboys and the cattle are bound to this land, forever searching for the shelter they were denied. People out on the old ranch roads, near the area they call Kincaid's Folly, they report things. The sound of thousands of hooves on hard earth when there's nothing there. A strange blue light, like St. Elmo's fire, hovering over the ground where the bodies were found." Her words hung in the air as I turned the page in the journal. Elias's handwriting was now a chaotic scrawl, the pencil lead broken and resharpened many times. From the Journal of Elias Vance, the first day of the storm. It came without warning. A wall of white descending from the north. One moment we could see the lead steer, the next we couldn't see our own hands. The temperature dropped so fast it felt like a physical blow. The wind is a banshee, a constant screaming howl that drives ice crystals into our skin like tiny needles. We are blind. The cattle, terrified, have started to drift with the wind, and we are powerless to stop them. We are just trying to stay in our saddles. To lose your horse is to die." From the Journal of Elias Vance, the second day. "Cannot feel my feet. Charlie fell from his horse. We heard him shout, but he was gone in the white maelstrom before we could turn back. He's dead. We are all going to die. The herd is a phantom, a moaning, invisible presence all around us. We follow the sound of them, hoping they find shelter, but they are just as lost as we are. Kincaid is like a man possessed. He keeps shouting about the contract, about the money. Is he mad? We are not driving a herd anymore. We are caught in a frozen, moving graveyard." I closed the journal, the words too raw, too real. The ghost story Isabella told was no longer a quaint piece of folklore. It was the echo of this very horror. The blue lights weren't some strange weather phenomenon. They were the frozen souls of men like Charlie. The phantom hoofbeats were the last desperate movements of a dying river of life. I looked at the map. I knew where I had to go. I had to go to Kincaid's Folly. I had to stand where they fell. It came without warning, a contract about the money. Is he mad? We are not driving a herd anymore. We are caught in a frozen, moving graveyard. I closed the journal, the words too raw, too real. The blue lights weren't some strange weather phenomenon. They were the frozen souls of men like Charlie. The phantom hoofbeats were the last desperate movements of a dying river of life. I looked at the map. I knew where I had to go. I had to go to Kincaid's Folly. I had to stand where they fell. Finding Kincaid's Folly wasn't easy. It wasn't on any map. It was a location that lived only in local memory, a shallow basin miles from any road, where the wind had piled the bodies of the cattle and cowboys like driftwood. Isabella gave me directions, drawing a map on a napkin that relied on landmarks like the lone mesquite tree and the collapsed windmill. After hours on jarring dirt tracks, I found it. The basin was wider and shallower than I'd imagined, now covered in sparse grass. But the ground felt different here, softer. For over a century, the earth had been slowly consuming the evidence of the tragedy. I walked the site, the journal in my hand, trying to align Elias's last desperate moments with the quiet landscape around me. It was here that the final, most damning entry was written. From the Journal of Elias Vance, the last day. The chuck wagon is overturned. The cattle are gone, vanished into the blizzard. Only 5 of us left. We found this small dip, a pathetic shelter. We will freeze here by morning. But the cold is not what killed us. It was Kincaid. Old Man Hemlock, our cook, tried to open the strongbox bolted under the wagon for the gold, not for greed, but to use the paper money inside to start a fire. Kincaid shot him dead. He screamed that it was his gold, payment for the herd, and no one would touch it. That's when I understood. The contract was a lie. He had a second, smaller bill of sale. He was going to sell the main herd to the government and the smaller herd to a second buyer and pocket the cash for the second sale himself. He drove us into the storm to cover his tracks, to make it look like a tragic accident. He meant to be the only survivor. My God, I sank to my knees, the dusty earth of the basin feeling like sacred ground. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a mass murder, orchestrated for a few $1,000s. The ghost herd wasn't just a memory of a storm. It was a testament to a crime. As I knelt there, my fingers tracing patterns in the dirt, they brushed against something hard and metallic. I dug around it, my heart pounding. It was a branding iron. The head was rusted and pitted, but the symbol was still clear. It wasn't the King's Crown brand. It was a simple J.B., Josiah Bell, the broker from the second bill of sale. It must have been on the doomed chuck wagon. It was the proof, the tangible link between Kincaid's greed and this mass grave. The ghosts of the Llano had just given me their smoking gun. From the Journal of Elias Vance, a confession, a witness statement scrawled by a dying man. Elias must have known he wouldn't survive, but he was determined that the truth would. From the Journal of Elias Vance, final entry. Kincaid sees me writing. He thinks I'm writing a letter home. He is mad, talking to himself, to the wind. He says the storm is a blessing, a perfect alibi. After he shot Hemlock, the other 2 men, just boys really, tried to run. He rode them down. I heard the shots, even over the wind. I am alone with him now. He is waiting for me to freeze. I have hidden the journal inside my coat, wrapped in oilskin. Maybe someone will find me, find this. He didn't just kill us. He stole our names.
Tell them, Kincaid murdered us for gold. The White Death has taken us. Kincaid's greed, our tomb. The herd, God, the herd screams forever. I stood up, holding the heavy branding iron. The wind began to pick up, whistling over the lip of the basin. For a moment I could almost hear it, a low, mournful sound that was more than just wind. It was the collective sorrow of 3,000 cattle and a dozen murdered men. They weren't angry or vengeful ghosts. They were just lost. Their story had been silenced, their deaths mislabeled as an act of God. Kincaid had not only stolen their lives and their names, he had stolen their truth. He had walked out of the storm a survivor, a hero, his fortune secured by the blood of his men, and had left their ghosts to cry in the wind, unheard. I drove back to Matador, the JB branding iron wrapped in a cloth on the passenger seat. The sun was setting, painting the vast, empty sky in hues of orange and deep purple. The landscape no longer felt empty to me. It felt full. It was a testament, a silent witness. The story of the ghost herd was not a supernatural tale to be told around a campfire. It was a murder mystery, and my great-grandfather had left me all the clues. I walked into Isabella's archive just as she was closing up. I placed the branding iron on her desk without a word. She looked at it, then at my face, and her own expression filled with a century of sad understanding. Josiah Bell, she whispered, tracing the initials with her finger. It was worse than talk, I said, my voice hoarse. It was murder. Kincaid's greed, our tomb, the herd. God, the herd screams forever.
With the branding iron and the journal, the story was no longer just folklore. It was evidence. Isabella and I spent the entire next day digging through land deeds and bank records. The picture that emerged was damning. Silas Kincaid had returned from the tragedy and, within a month, made a large, unexplained cash deposit at a bank in Fort Worth. A few months later, he used that money to buy a massive ranch, the foundation of a small empire. He had built his legacy on a lie, fertilized with the blood of his crew. The world remembered him as a resilient pioneer. Elias's journal remembered him as a monster. That night, I felt a pull to go back to Kincaid's folly. Isabella warned against it. The wind is picking up. Another blue norther is blowing in. It's not a blizzard, but the plains are no place to be in a storm at night. The ghosts get restless. I had to go. It felt like an appointment I had to keep. I drove out as the temperature dropped, the wind buffeting my truck. I parked at the edge of the basin and got out. The wind was a physical force, cold and sharp, and in it I heard them. It started as a low hum, then grew into a cacophony of sound, the unmistakable, heart-breaking bawling of thousands of cattle in distress. It was all around me, a symphony of ghostly panic. I wasn't afraid. I was listening. This wasn't a haunting. It was a testimony. They were telling their story in the only way they knew how. Then I saw it.
Out in the center of the basin, a faint, pulsing blue light appeared. Then another and another. They hovered just above the ground, weaving and dancing in the wind. The ghost lights of the Llano. They weren't frightening. They were beautiful, like lost stars searching for their sky. I stood there for what felt like hours, a lone, living man bearing witness to a century-old memory. I took out my great-grandfather's journal and read his final words aloud, my voice carried away by the wind, offering them back to the spirits who wrote them. As I spoke the last word, the wind seemed to soften, the ghostly lowing subsided, and the blue lights flickered one last time and vanished. The basin was quiet again, leaving only the clean, cold sigh of the north wind.
The next morning, the air was still and cold, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The storm had passed. My work there was done, but it also felt like it was just beginning. I couldn't change the past, but I could correct the record. I spent the next week working with Isabella, compiling everything, a full transcript of Elias's journal, photographs of the branding iron, the financial records that damned Kincaid. We presented our findings to the Texas Historical Commission. We wrote an article for the Regional Historical Journal, laying out the true story of the Kincaid Drive. We didn't destroy a hero's legacy. We uncovered the truth of a villain's crime. The town of Matador officially amended its history. The small display about the Kincaid tragedy was replaced by a new, larger one. It was dedicated to the lost crew of the Llano Estacado, and it listed every man's name, with my great-grandfather, Elias Vance, at the top. His faded photograph, once lost in a group, was now centered, his hopeful smile a testament to the life that was stolen. The JB branding iron sat in a glass case, a silent accuser, and next to it, a replica of the journal, open to the final heartbreaking page. Before I left Texas, I drove out to Kincaid's Folly one last time. It was a peaceful afternoon. The sun was warm, and a gentle breeze rustled the grass. It was just a place again, a shallow dip in the vast, unending plains. There were no voices in the wind, no ghostly lights. The story had been told. The truth had been set free. My inheritance hadn't been dust and ghosts after all. It had been a voice. The voice of a young man who had died in the snow more than 100 years ago, who had trusted that someday someone would come along who was willing to listen. As I drove away, the Llano Estacado stretching out in my rearview mirror, I felt a sense of peace. The herd was finally quiet. They had been heard.